The chair now recognizes the chairman of the full committee, the gentlelady from Washington, Ms. McMorris Rodgers, for her questions.
Thank you. Delivering electric power reliability and affordability is vital for public health and safety. Yet irresponsible climate policies have relentlessly been pushing to eliminate the baseload generation that is essential for assuring that people have power, especially when they need it the most. Grid authorities are finally speaking up about the risk to the public, as witnesses today are highlighting. The Biden administration, like the Obama administration, has set policy goals to decarbonize the grid by 2035, and it is a pace that is dangerous to the public. The Obama administration used the Clean Air Act to circumvent Congress as a weapon to force retirements and drive out baseload power, even when proposed standards did not withstand legal challenge. It looks like the Biden EPA is attempting the same thing. Mr. Nassy, would you briefly walk through the estimates in your testimony for the immediate and long-term impacts of EPA's proposals? How much coal and gas generation could be retired?
Thank you, Chairwoman. I will. Pages 11 and 12 of my testimony set out the data. EPA's models about what's going to happen, frankly, are not credible. They don't confer with NERC, FERC, RTOs, or states to develop them, and they conflict specifically with many of my clients' plans. So you have to look at the data, and the data from EIA, both Forms 860M and 923, show that about 55,000 megawatts of coal is expected to retire by 2032, but 155,000 megawatts are not. And so that is what is on the block, the chopping block for retirement for the reasons I explained. On the gas fleet, because they've done this by capacity factor, you look at that same data set and you look at the capacity factors, and those that are over a 45% capacity factor, it depends on an economic test, but grossly speaking, that would impact 194,000 megawatts of existing gas-fired generation. At the best case, if it's actually only over a 55% capacity factor, it's 126,000 gigawatts of existing gas. So EPA's predictions are frankly at odds with the data and the announced plans of folks, and the compressed timelines are going to force those retirements.
Thank you. Do you know how many plants would actually comply with this rule?
I mean, we will have a handful of plants. I said in my written testimony, I'm a big supporter of CCS technology. I've been involved in projects for 20 years. A handful of projects that are sitting on great geology that might be able to take the risk. But that is in the hundreds and maybe a couple thousand megawatts of that massive fleet. The other facilities are just too dependent upon pipeline infrastructure that doesn't exist. And on the gas side, hydrogen that doesn't exist. Low GHG hydrogen is not a commercial product. And so to bank a standard on something that doesn't exist in reality now, and even because of metallurgical and other reasons, frankly, can't realistically be moved around, is a big problem.
Thank you. Mr. Laughlin and Mr. Schnittler, you're either directly responsible for producing it and providing power or represent the companies that do so. Would retirements on this scale that Mr. Nassy just described substantially change the generation mix on the grid?
Well, it will, and it's what's particularly being targeted are baseload generation units, which may be a few in number, but they provide a large percentage of the energy and a large percentage of the reliability services that we depend on. As I've said earlier, anybody that's seriously looked at our current situation realizes that we have elevated risk right now during extreme weather events, and any decline in those baseload resources greater than what we're already expecting is certainly going to have a negative impact on that going forward.
I'd echo the comments about the need for us to ensure that we have sufficient resources. And if you look at the EIA data from their most recent report, just came out about a month ago, it talks about the potential need for additional resources to support the system, even under a high renewables penetration scenario. It's at a minimum of 9 gigawatts of new natural gas, or as high as 360 gigawatts of new natural gas, which would be required in order to ensure reliability on the system. That suggests to me that we're going to need more, not less. It's a both and, not an either or scenario.
Thank you. Back to Mr. Nassy, you were involved in the litigation over President Obama's Clean Power Plan, which eventually resulted in West Virginia versus EPA. Do you think Section 111 of the Clean Air Act authorized EPA to transform the electric system like this, or is it just another example of the federal agency circumventing Congress's Article 1 authorities?
Absolutely. You know, the Clean Air Act is based in a principle that you can't infer massive powers from Congress in vague language. And the Act requires, and the Supreme Court's opinion requires, that the system of emission reduction start and finish inside the fence of a facility. When you are banking on an overhaul of an entire energy system, you are technology forcing in a way that is explicitly prohibited by both the Act and by the Supreme Court.
Thank you. We are the elected representatives of the people. We should be making these decisions around the Clean Air Act. I yield back.